Alright, this is the tutorial for the Rude Bets NBA game and player prop model. This is how you use the simulator effectively and kind of what you're looking at on the screen so that you understand and can effectively use the tool. So first off, once you actually subscribe to the site, all you do is you go to the members tab and then you just select your simulator that you want. So for this case, we're going to select the NBA simulator and then you dive in. So it might take a second to load here. And then once it does, here's a pro tip. Right off the bat, click on the sheet somewhere, hold control on your keyboard and zoom out with your mouse by scrolling down, and it gives you a more favorable view so it's not so zoomed in. Same thing goes for the game simulator. Scroll out a little bit and then you're done. So let's start with the game sim just because it's easy and it's a lot quicker. All you do is you just type in your two teams, Knicks, Raptors, and it spits out the predicted score. So 109.98, that's a spread of 11 and a total of 207. It's got all the lineups that are adjusted for injuries, so players that are hurt will not be populating in here. And ignore the point sim, as this says in the yellow box. Ignore these points if you're looking at these for player props. These are not correlated to what the actual scientific predicted score will be for the night. It's a part of the data aggregation for the weighted average of the actual total score at the top. It's part of the calculation, but it's not a part of the actual player prop model. So all you do for the game sim is just type in the two teams and you get your score. But at the bottom here, the player sim is the other tab, and this is where things are a little bit more complicated at first, but once you get used to it, it's pretty easy. So let's type in our players. Giannis, let's say he's playing against the Lakers, and then home or away. This is in reference to your player, so in reference to Giannis, Giannis is at home. And here we go. So starting at the top, we have XMP. X stands for expected, so expected minutes played, about 36. Opponent rank versus his position, so against his position, which is listed here as a power forward, they're the 14th ranked defense, 1 being the toughest, 30 being the easiest, 14th right in the middle. Going across the top as well, we have our expected field goal attempts, and this is weighted based on the pace of the game. So based on the projected number of shots total for this specific matchup, we're expecting him to take 17 shots, and with the free throws, about 27. That's his expected number. His normal number is around 29, but based on the pace of this game, we're expecting about 27. So continuing to go against the top, you have his three-point attempts. So 5% of his shots total are three-pointers, and he makes about 29% of those. And then the only other thing that's pretty relevant across the top would be his volume percentage. And this is a weighted number based on the pace of the game as well as based on injury allocation of shots. So if we look at somebody, for example, like Gary Trent, who has a bunch of injured people on his team, you notice there's a lot of shot reallocation to be had. So he has about a 200% increase in volume compared to his season averages. So his season average, he takes about 12 shots. In this game, we're expecting him to take about 22. So much higher, but that's adjusted for those injuries and the pace of the game. Let's go back to Giannis. And let's look at what we have on the screen here. So on the screen, we have an injury designation. So if they're injured, you'll know if it's questionable, or if they're out, like let's just say Shea, who's out tonight, it'll light up, everything's injured. All right, so each category, for each stat category that you could look at for a player prop is going to be kind of color coordinated here. So everything in this blue area is correlated to rebounds, the orange is assists, and so on and so forth. This line right here is something for you to manually enter because you might be looking at alt lines, you might be having a different line on Prize Picks compared to Chalkboard, compared to DraftKings, so you would just type this in. Let's say his line is 12.5 rebounds, you type that in, and it's going to automatically populate the over-under percentage as well as reassign the line on the graph so you can look at that. So all we're seeing here is the matchup factor at the top for each category, and what this is this correlates to the defensive rank versus the position. Green being better for the player, red being worse for the player, better for the defense. So it's a percentage metric. So in this case, 1.04 means there's a 4% boost in rebounds to power forwards by the Lakers, and so on and so forth. So for points in this case, they give up 1% less points to power forwards than league average. So that's what that is. That's what that number is. In this case, assists, they give up 15% more. And on the right, we have our last 5-game average for Giannis and our last 10-game average for Giannis for each stat category. So for rebounds, he's averaging about 14.6 over his last 5 and 12.7 over his last 10. So continuing forward, we have our graphs. This doesn't populate for every player. Unfortunately, it's just a product of this being built in Excel, and it should, once we move this to an actual offline database, it'll be much better, but some data is better than no data. So for this case, it does populate for Giannis. So if we're looking at points, and the line is 29.5, While we do have him projected for about 29 points, you'll notice in his last 5 games versus the Lakers, he's gone over on every single game over that 29.5 line. So you can use this to look at what has he done against that opponent over their last 5 games against each other. Some of this data may be relevant for a player like Giannis, where he's been in the same role for multiple years, but there are players who have maybe gone into their sophomore year or their 3rd year in the NBA, and they've taken on a much larger increased role, so the data might not be as relevant. Or, for example, a guy like Andrew Wiggins, he has taken on a lesser role. So let's look at him against the Heat, yesterday's matchup. You'll notice his points, I think his line was 10.5. You'll notice that, okay, it looks like 4 of his last 5, or 5 of his last 5, actually, he's covered this line. But these 4 games right here where he was scoring about 20 a game, he was in a completely different role. He was kind of a main focal point, whereas now he's taken a little bit more of a role player role on the team. So some of that data, just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's really about it. It's pretty simple to use. Like I said, each thing is just in a color-coordinated category, the matchup factors and relative to the defense versus the position, and then the over-unders, those percentages are just changing as you enter in the new line. So yeah, happy hunting. Use this tool as much as you possibly can. The data is extremely accurate, and this will be your best chance to succeed in this industry. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.